Hey, everybody, and welcome back to episode 11 of Backs of All Trades podcast. I'm with my first ever in-person guest. This is Chris Klaus. He's an entrepreneur, philanthropist. He does a lot with startup accelerators at CreateX, which is his startup accelerator program at Georgia Tech that he basically started. We both attended Georgia Tech. You have a bit of an interesting story when it comes to that, which we'll get into in a little bit. But we're at his beautiful home in his backyard right now. Chris, I just want to thank you so much for coming on, and it is an honor to not only call you, a guest of the show, but also a friend.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and look forward to having our conversation.
Yeah. So Chris is probably most well known for founding a company, which he actually started is a passion project. Was it in high school that you officially started internet security systems, or when was version 0.1?
0.1, I would say probably my interest in cybersecurity started in probably middle school up until high school, and was coding up a program that would automate what hackers do. And that was high school. And it wasn't until college that I released it for free. And then I had so much feedback going, hey, have you thought about commercializing it? And then that was like the light bulb that kind of that one question put me on a totally different trajectory.
Yeah. So Chris founded a company called Internet Security Systems, and we're not going to go too much into the story today because it's one I'm sure you've told many times, but it is a phenomenal one. I suggest everyone go check it out. And he actually ended up leaving Georgia Tech before finishing his degree to go pursue that, and it turned it into a unicorn, right? That's every startup founder's dream, is to turn it to $1 billion company, and then was later even acquired. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I want to ask you, what do you actually introduce yourself as? If you're meeting a stranger for the first time, hi, I'm Chris Klaus, and, cocktail party, what do you say?
Yeah, that's a good question. Normally I'm Chris Klaus. If we're talking about what do you do, usually it's like I'm involved with technology. I'm an entrepreneur and now investor, and really trying to create a startup ecosystem.
Very cool. So the first sort of question I wrote down here, because there's a lot of stuff I want to cover, is that a lot of people today, especially on my platform, I talk a lot about my experience at Georgia Tech, how valuable it was to me. I'm now a software engineer, and I credit a very large portion of my success at my young age to my education at Georgia Tech. We have different stories because you obviously ended up deciding to go pursue your company as opposed to finishing your degree at Georgia Tech. And many people today, with rising costs of colleges and a number of different factors, whether it is you can make money online, will hear the term college is a scam, or maybe that college is a dated system. And so I'm wondering, as someone who didn't actually end up finishing college, what would you say to those kids who hear the college is a scam sort of statement?
I think a lot of it really comes down to what colleges. Some of them probably are scams. So I would just say, do the research to find out, what kind of acceptance rate of or job. When you graduate, you can usually ask, what's the percentage of kids that are graduating? What jobs did they get? What's their average salary? And I know when you look at Georgia Tech and probably any engineering school or computer science school, that degree is not something you can just typically get off the internet. That's a pretty hard degree to get. And so you see that there's a high demand for those students. So I would say in that scenario, or those graduates, that there's a real payoff to go to college for that.
Yeah. So it rings true. That's what I always recommend to people as well. I say that, long days are over of essentially going to study something that you just maybe are super passionate about at a school that's, $60,000, sometimes even $80,000 a year. And I tell them, like, you should go actually look at the return on investment of these degrees. Go look at what type of jobs you can get with the degree that you're pursuing, because that ultimately is going to determine whether you think it was a scam or not. Because again, Georgia Tech is ranked, I think, number one in terms of ROI for a public university. And so to call that a scam, it's more of an investment. And then you also get a lot of other stuff with the education.
No, it's a huge investment. And quite frankly, going to a university, a lot of the value is not just the education, but all the other peers that you're meeting, your fellow students and faculty, and And that's one of the reasons why I've kind of gone back to help try to enable more entrepreneurship at the college level. Is there's just an immense amount of resources, whether it's hacker spaces or builder spaces where you can 3D print your product, or if you have questions about almost anything, you'll find some professor who's studied it, researched it, and so you can't get that anywhere else. So I think it's definitely a worthwhile investment to go attend college.
Yeah, I remember I was talking in one of my videos, and I said that when you do go to a school like Georgia Tech, and obviously we're a bit affiliated to Georgia Tech, so that's maybe why we're talking about Georgia Tech specifically. But I mean, I had professors who were inventing new fields of study, who had written the textbooks that were taught all across the country of that particular course, right? And so the pure human capital that you have access to, in addition to obviously like the literal capital in the form of whether it is CreateX or the maker spaces, but the human capital component, I think you can't really get that online in any capacity, or at least it would be much more difficult.
I also think there's an alumni network that when you're trying to get a job somewhere, if you can look up like who from your university is inside this company or try to get access to a different department, et cetera, it helps to be able to rely on your alumni.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, your involvement at Georgia Tech is far and wide. And I actually, Chris Klaus donated money to actually fund the new building for the College of Computing. And I lived in a fraternity house that was right next to it, right? And I took many classes in it. So it's so cool to be sitting down with you today. And, you know, I could literally sit and saw the Klaus Advanced Computing Building every day. But what you're probably most well known for at Georgia Tech and your involvement specifically is what we've already alluded to a number of times, which is CreateX, which is the student startup accelerator program.
Sure.
And I encourage everyone to go look it up. It's a program that's actually essentially being replicated, you know, and many places are at least trying to, or even you were just telling me that you're trying to do it in other countries, even at places, universities like AUB. My question is, as someone who was a successful entrepreneur, why do you put so much importance on helping students and entrepreneurship as opposed to just say going into like VC or funding already successful companies with proven founders?
Yeah, it's a good question. It really is more of an origin story for myself, in that's when I wanted to do a startup or started down the path. And it's kind of, they always say kind of look, if you are going to do a startup, find problems that you can relate to. So I was like, these were the problems I had. You know, when I was trying to do a startup at Georgia Tech, I had nobody to talk to. Like, who could spell startups then? And you know, I was like, just trying to figure out what would I need to be successful. And so that's kind of what we replicated within CreateX. Going back, saying, is it, you know, time? You know, as you know, trying to find time for a startup is almost impossible at Georgia Tech. So we ended up doing something I think pretty innovative. We actually hacked the internship process. So we ended up talking to the internship office and said, hey, if a student has their own startup, can we consider that an, you know, actual internship? And they agreed to it. And it's actually a pretty interesting backdoor for students to find time, keep their student visa, especially for international students. And you know, we've also solved funding, mentorship, all the course curriculum. There's a whole bunch of things that I wish they had at Georgia Tech. So we've implemented, and that's really what's enabling a lot more students to take the risk. And I also think if you look at where you are in life, I would say the highest risk is like later when you have a stable job, you're married, you have kids, you have a house, you have car payments, everything else. It's really hard to go, you know what, let me take 6 to 12 months and bootstrap this startup from the ground, versus when you're a student and you spend your summer working on your internship / startup, your biggest risk is at the end of the summer, if it doesn't work out, you just continue your education. You're no worse or no worse off than a typical internship. And so you're going to learn a lot doing a startup during the summer, working on whatever problem you're passionate about.
Yeah, no, that's a great pitch for CreateX. I think it is a truly novel program. It was not the actual startup launch, but for my senior design, which is the culminating course that you take at Georgia Tech for computer engineering. There was an option to take the CreateX one. I took that. I had so much fun with it. Turned out that my group mates were maybe not the people I would have ended up being startup founders with, but as an aspiring entrepreneur, I think that I did learn so much during that. And actually, I was just curious because I'm sure you have some numbers off the top of your head. How many companies does Georgia Tech produce now annually? And even there's been some unicorns in the past year as well, right?
Sure. Great question. I think so. I've been building this platform now called Fusion, and it's going to be an overlay with CreateX. And if you want to check it out, that would be kind of a starting point for a lot of students to sign up. Ultimately, those numbers for like Georgia Tech, so it's over 100 startups a year, and we've had over 500, I think now over 600 startups go through the program. I'd say if you make it through the summer, half of them continue to work on their startup. So I would consider that a pretty good success rate of getting in there, finding you're passionate about it, and still wanting to continue, finding out whether you like your co-founders, is this the right problem, et cetera. And you're right. There's been some unicorns that have come out of it, and there's a bunch of, you don't have to have a unicorn. So, even if you have a $10 million business, $20 million business, that's huge for anybody, especially coming out of college.
Oh yeah, 22, 23 years old. That's what I think so many people, at least online today, especially young men, I think are sold you need to become as rich as possible. Either you'll be ineligible on the dating market or whatever it is. And I think because of that, they're willing to take shortcuts that are, for example, e-commerce or drop shipping or all of these sort of online, what I consider to be schemes or scams. And I think that, the true way to amass wealth like that would be to solve a problem that people are willing to pay for your solution or do something better that no one's ever done before.
Yeah. And I one of the things that came up this week, actually, I was down at Georgia Tech talking to students, and I was asking them in a class setting, like, what are the blockers for you? I mean, are you aware of CreateX? Why aren't you doing a startup? A big issue is the short-term, hey, I need to intern so I can get $50 an hour. And the funny thing about that is I think we've got to do a better job communicating that I'm out of the box. When I do my investment, it's at a $5 million valuation. So and you're getting $25,000 right up front for the summer. That works out to about $50 an hour. And then on top of it, we've actually had quite a few startups in the last year who've hit we have a milestone kind of progress where they've got the $500,000 for their company. There's a 10% equity, that's $5 million. And ultimately for somebody who's interning for a large company, like a FANG kind of company, $50 an hour, that's 50 years to get to $5 million. So I'm seeing every day the students that do take the risk, even though I think it's a low risk, they're actually they're basically shortcutting the line to a $5 million company right off the bat. And many of them go on to have it valued much higher.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. The culminating question about this, because I have so much stuff I want to cover, is if CreateX existed when you were thinking about pursuing ISS, do you think that you would have finished your degree?
That's a good question. Probably not. I actually took a break from Georgia Tech, and then I never went back to finish it, so I'm still technically on break.
Well, there you go. You might go back one of these days. I know that you were recently given a honorary doctorate as well from...
I've not officially accepted it, but yes, I'll be accepting it later next year.
Very cool. This is a question that I think many people are curious about because... having not only something that a passion project turn into a unicorn or a $1 billion company, something that you were literally working on while you were a college student. But because IBM, International Business Machines, actually acquired ISS in 2006 for, according to the articles, $1.3 billion cash. And so I'm wondering, like, as a human being, what does that feel like when that deal goes through? Because obviously, I'm sure that was a long time coming, but that sort of is in a lot of ways the culmination. And so I don't know, you're happy, relieved, didn't know what to feel. What does that feel like?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, one of the things that when I started the company, the To me, it was really to learn, and it wasn't with the goal of selling it in any specific time. I think, we would always look at opportunities. The history of ISS from the beginning of internet security systems, we always had people offer to buy ISS, and fortunately, most of the offers were kind of valued at the time that they were giving it. But we were like, if we keep working on this, our value kept doubling every year. So I was like, why sell now? Let's keep it going. We ended up actually taking the company public, and so the IPO for that was many years earlier than before it got acquired. So as a founder, that's probably the bigger event in the history of ISS, that to go from a private company to now we're on Wall Street. Now you can trade your shares. And so most of or at least in my case, the majority of like your wealth creation is really when you unlock and start selling and diversifying your shares. So I think ISS getting acquired by IBM was more of felt to me like this was a natural part of the overall journey. I've seen it go from my grandmother's spare guest bedroom to getting 10 employees to hundreds to thousands, taking it public, being international, having offices around the world. Very exciting time in my life. And then, I think IBM was a good fit for ISS. So it ended up being a great fit. And I wanted to kind of give back to what got me going. And that's where I actually gave stock from ISS to Georgia Tech. That was what I donated, and that stock got turned into a building.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so cool because I think that many people may have no affiliation as well to their alma mater, if you refer to Georgia Tech as that, because it maybe didn't serve the purposes for you at the time. And so I think that's awesome that you're still so involved and, do give back to Georgia Tech, because many people in your position wouldn't. So that's awesome. The IPO, that makes sense. I think that when you talk about a startup, I think that really is, the first thing on people's mind of, okay, that's the dream, right? Take it public.
That's right.
My question next is a bit more about you specifically and a bit more fulfillment wise, because you are incredibly humble. I've known you for some time now, and yet you have amassed an amount of wealth that most people can barely conceive of or would dream of. And I'm wondering now, so many odd years later, since you would have reached what many people would call ultimate financial freedom, how do you find fulfillment? How do you choose to spend your time? Because for many people, it is waking up and that's what they're hunting. They're hunting, money or all the money in the world or whatever it is. And so for someone who's quote unquote achieved that, what do you do? How do you decide to spend your days?
It's a great question. I think there's parts of my journey that I think were helpful from even the beginning to try and make those decisions. One of the things that I was fortunate having a family member that was into meditation, teach me how to do that. And that actually is a practice that I highly recommend. Anybody who's going to become a founder, or if you are a founder, one of the big challenges, especially in the younger generation, is mental health. And I think we're always on social media and trying to consume it and create it and everything else. And I think meditation's a chance for your brain to reset. And so I would probably say that's been very beneficial in making kind of a reflection of, am I on the right journey? Am I making the right decision? So every decision I've made that was major, I always would meditate on it and kind of make sure I never had regrets, because it was the best decision I could make at the time and the knowledge that I had to do what I did. So ultimately, that was a key part of it. And I think sense of purpose is a thing that I think I asked a lot of people, like, what's your purpose? And it's always interesting how many people are like still seeking, like, what is their purpose? And I feel blessed and grateful that I think through meditation and kind of being on my own spiritual journey, a lot of it came from giving back and helping others and being grateful that I've had this very interesting path in life, and then how do I get more people to follow that path? Give them the keys that I found that help me be successful. How do I enable them? And I think I actually find that it's more the giving to others that makes it, the world a better place.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think that I've thought about that question too, and the most succinctly I put it is to give my friends and my family and those around me the best possible life I can give them. And that might mean monetarily, it might mean just being there, it might mean whatever it is. But if I'm a net positive to the people I care about, and obviously the more wealth you amass, then the more lives you can change with that. But I think that as long as you're, again, trying to create more of a positive income or like positive outcome for people around you, that's at least how I find fulfillment as well.
Yeah, awesome.
Which is part of the reason why I love talking to, hundreds of thousands of people to just give advice, the things I've learned. The other thing that I think is really interesting about you is still on the topic of like fulfillment, is you do seem to be at least somewhat spontaneous when it comes to, for example, hiking Kilimanjaro, which you did recently, which I'm sure there was a lot of planning that went into it, but in the grand scheme of things, maybe not as much as some people who train for years, plan for years. And so I'm wondering how, and then you also joined us on our trip to Lebanon earlier this year, which I'm so glad you got to come see that. But what are these other ways that do you feel like you are trying to create an exciting life as well, and making sure that you're able to find fulfillment in ways like that?
It's a good question. I think this year I was turning 50, and I was like, what do you do as a 50-year-old? And on my bucket list of things that I do a thing called mind mapping. I don't know if you've heard of mind mapping. Yeah. So I will sit there and kind of mind map like all my goals and whatever I can think of, right? And then Kilimanjaro has been one of those things on my list of I should do that at some point. And, I think when I was turning 50 in September, I was like, I should do this now. And because I was like, otherwise I'll never do it. And fortunately, I had a friend and a couple that I know that timing-wise, I met up with them, and they're doing Kilimanjaro. I was like, I'm off by like a week or so. I was like, why don't we combine forces? And so ended up getting two other couples to go with us. And it was probably the most challenging physical and mental event in my life. I realized that was probably my peak climbing challenge. I probably will not be doing Mount Everest or any other crazy peak ever, because I found that halfway through I was like, what the heck did I just sign up for? How do I hit the eject button? But by day 4, it was 7 days, so to climb the mountain ended up by day 5 you go to the summit starting at 11 p.m. 8 hours later, through the dark, you can't see anything, just looking up there's blackness and just a little bit of headlamps ahead of you. You can see like almost like a Christmas tree lights up the mountain. And I'm like falling asleep while still climbing. I ended up I think my only advice to my 20-year-old self would be, if you're going to do Kilimanjaro, do it in your 20s and 30s, but don't wait till you're 50. I was like, never breathed so hard in my life. And
frozen snot to your face.
You're freezing. You're like, what am I doing? And then but it's so rewarding though, because when the sun finally broke, you're at the summit and unbelievable view of the whole, like you're in the clouds. You're like, if that's heaven, you're only there for 20 minutes. So, and I brought my fusion flag and had us all kind of holding it up at the summit. And then it was awesome to come back down and get some oxygen.
Yeah. Yeah. Is the summit, is there the peak that is just the small patch of land that is the top?
There is. There's a sign.
Yeah.
Like you can't get any higher. You're any higher, you're gonna fall off the earth. So it was pretty high. And but I was blown away by all the people I met on the mountain, and we ended up doing the Serengeti and visiting Rwanda, Uganda, some of the countries nearby, and I met so many young people there that also were trying to learn computer science, and I was like, look, if you guys get a startup going here, I'll invest. So
There you go.
I think I got some future entrepreneurs going on in East Africa.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I think that for someone who could, I think many people would assume that someone who likes to live as comfortably as possible, to put yourself in pretty much the most extreme discomfort someone could do willingly, I think sort of goes in the face in that. But it's also super cool that you choose to do that. My next question is, we're talking about entrepreneurs all over the world, and in, whether it's East Africa or America, I think is where most people sort of just assume, and I'm currently living in Silicon Valley. That's the heart, right? Do you think that anyone can be as successful as you are? Do you think that there are certain qualities that are sort of prerequisites, whether that's hardworking? And then lastly, how much do you think luck plays a role in success in sort of the most extreme degree?
It's a good question. I do think luck plays out in many forms. I felt lucky because I was like, what are the chances of me going to Georgia Tech, me working on an interesting hobby that ended up turning into a big problem around the world with cybersecurity. So I feel grateful because of feeling lucky. And once you get on a mission, you kind of, as you tell others about it, you end up finding others that want to join you. So it's kind of like what you put out, you'll get in return. So I think it's back to your core question though is, is it something that could be replicated? And reduce complete luckiness? And is there a pattern that you could do to say, hey, how do you turn an idea and materialize it into a real company? I've actually spent a lot of time not only thinking about it, but doing the analysis on what makes up a unicorn. And we're actually helping students kind of rethink their vision. They may have a mission that they're trying to solve this problem. Is there ways to help you turn it into a unicorn? And so some high level things is typically if you look at the most unicorns in the last 10, 20 years, they tend to be technology companies, right? And so one of the things that we're starting to put in place as we're funding a lot of these student startups is in that team of co-founders, they don't all have to be technical, but somebody has to be technical. And so we're kind of going back to say, I think for a technology startup, you really need, if you were going to open a restaurant, you need a chef. You need the same thing with a builder who can build the technology, so if you're going to build a startup, that will be a big thing. Another big factor, I think, in success is how big is that problem? How big is the market? If you're solving it and only, 100 potential customers exist, then it's never going to be a unicorn. And this is why I would not recommend if there's lifestyle businesses or hobby type businesses. There's a lot of Main Street businesses that will never really become unicorns. We're looking for helping students think outside that box to say, hey, is this a problem that goes beyond even the U.S. borders? Does it impact Latin America, Asia, Europe? If you have that kind of a problem, then you can scale infinitely. And so that's kind of the global mindset we're looking for, is a global mindset, ambition to scale, big problem, a technical co-founder, hopefully a solution. I think AI and software, I think those pieces together, you're going to see a lot of startups become unicorns over the next 5, 10, 20 years.
Oh, absolutely. That's so much great advice in such a short amount of time. Something about that is, are there certain qualities that you look for in a founder that you think either are conducive to success or arguably working against them, whether it's arrogance or blistering, unbridled confidence, right? I think that those can kind of blur the lines, but some might say, you need to have so much belief that you won't fail, that in the face of adversity you won't, or some might say that, you'll become stupid and blindsided by very real problems that you ignored.
I don't, it's a good question. I think somebody on a team has to be technically confident that they can actually build the prototype, get it up, hopefully be able to listen. That's probably a quality that not everybody has, but it's something that if you're going to be a founder, you need to listen to customers. You got to listen to your team. So I think having that, I think that's something you can learn. I don't think it's a human trait as much as take a breath, listen for what are they actually saying and what does that really mean. And a lot of times customers are maybe having, they might think they have this solution for you, but you may need to dig into what is the real pain point. So I'll be honest. I think if you looked at a lot of the founders that have been successful that I've funded, we're really looking for people that can build. I would actually say many of them would have traits that you would not probably label as, oh, that's an entrepreneur trait. I don't know if that really exists. I see such a variety. There's some skill sets you need. I think communication, if you're going to be the CEO, if you're going to be the CTO, can you build what you're going to build? And that still also requires communication. So can you communicate? Can you build it? Can you listen? I mean, those are some basic things that you have to be able to do. I do think there's red flags. I have seen founders that, several big red flags that I would say. One is BSing people, overselling it. And if you're talking to somebody who else is technical enough to peel back the onion, they're going to see that what's the reality of what you're doing. I think the other thing that I see with a lot of founders early on, usually they're so nervous about, is their idea big enough? And the problem with that a lot of times is they end up going, here's 5 different problems that are all kind of related, and here's 10 other solutions. And you're like, all right, that's too many solutions to build. You need to just, what's the number one thing you got to build for what problem, and simplify it down, especially as a small company. And you don't want too many, you can't be that unfocused. You have to focus on, this is the message, this is the problem, and these are the customers we're going to target.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that the solve everything approach is definitely a beginner mistake that I saw even in my CreateX group. That's something that we dealt with, is trying to take on way too much, way too fast. The next question I want to ask you is still about entrepreneurship, but I think that many people don't realize, especially because most of my audience is roughly in like the, let's say 15 to 25, some up to like 30, but young, primarily males, but young people. And my generation doesn't really realize that entrepreneurship and startups and this thing, it was not as cool as it is today. For example, when you were building your company, you did not have all of the people either online to look at for motivation, but also for ideas, for education. And so my question is, what do you think is being spewed in terms of information when it comes to entrepreneurship that you actually disagree with? Like, what you see the advice that's online all the time about, because
Sure.
it's such a cool topic to talk about now. What do you think is advice that you disagree with? And then what do you think is not said enough?
For sure. That's a really great question. Interestingly, I was at a Georgia Tech class this week asking students, why aren't you doing a startup? Number one blocker, and this was at Georgia Tech, but I believe this is applicable to every university possibly in the world except one. And I think, and I got feedback on one, which was Stanford, where every student at Stanford is talking about startups. There's no one talking about how to get a job at some large company like Google or Meta or whatever. It's like, what is your startup? And so that's the culture that I think needs to change. And so when I was talking, like, what's the blocker for you guys building a startup? They're like, none of our peers are talking about startups. We're being hammered with, where are you going to intern? Which FANG are you going to work for? And I think that psychology of like, you have to go work for a large company really is pervasive. And I've talked to a lot of students. I'm like, why are you going to go work for a large company? And it's like, oh, that's how I get my business experience. It's actually counterproductive to go work for a large company, because usually in a large company, the big problem's been solved. So any new employees get kind of a very narrow job focus within a large company. You don't wear a lot of hats. You're wearing one hat to do one thing within that company. That's totally counter to what a startup is. You got to wear every hat. Every day you're customer support, you're building, you're selling, you're marketing, you're HR, everything. And so to me, and you got to execute fast. And I'd say for probably 90+% of most large companies, executing fast is not a concept. And so I think that's the stuff that I hear that even today when I talk to students, like what's stopping you? I think culture, being aware that there is a startup ecosystem. Like even when I was there, I was like, did you know there's a student club dedicated to startups? And like half the class had no idea. And I'm like, we all make assumptions that are in there when you're in the community that everybody knows about it. But then if you take a bunch of random people, students, and ask them like, oh, did you know about this club or that club and this stuff going on? They have no idea. So I think what you're doing is creating more awareness for others to go, hey, I've never considered doing a startup. What's the path? And my guess is every campus in this country probably does have a student club for startups. There are probably already resources, but you have to go hunt them down and figure out where they are and which faculty and what other students are doing it. So that's the narrative that I would love to see shift, because this is a unique time to go figure out what you're passionate about, find purpose, go solve a real problem. And there's, enough problems in the world, as we know. So, I would love to help fund more startups solving today's problems.
Absolutely. I think that there is somewhat what your comment on the joining a big company. I think that there is a lot of people, especially around that age, that have a bit of an identity problem. And there can be kind of an in-group, out-group sort of idea that, hey, I'm going to go work at the big company because that's what'll make me cool or successful. And the fear of failure, I think, is really big. Obviously, I think that there is no excuse now in terms of not having the information, because again, anyone has access to it. So if you're truly interested in it, to go pursue it. I don't think that, for example, an excuse that you could have used in your time, which is like, if I want to figure out how to do this thing, I kind of got to do it myself or work really hard to network. Whereas I think today it's a lot easier to do that. But I do think that there's probably people who are like, whether it's parents or friends or whatever, oh, if I don't work at one of the big 4 consulting firms, then what was the point of my degree?
I want to hit on something you just talked about, which was fear of failure. One of that is something that I saw a lot when we were having that conversation. Where am I technical enough? Even though they were able to code, am I technically capable of doing a startup? And I'm like, or is my idea technically good enough? Or what happens if it doesn't? It fails. And I want to stress that almost all of my startup teams that I've seen go through this whole process, once they get on the going out there trying to talk to customers, figure out their pain points, the vast majority of them end up realizing their startup idea originally is a failure idea, meaning it's okay. You know what they do? They pivot. They go, okay, now that I'm talking to some customers, I realize this idea is not good. That's okay. There's no shame in failure. It's an idea. You're not a failure. Maybe the assumptions you had were a failure, but I tell all the teams, I'm backing the team. It's okay to pivot. I want you to pivot to bigger and better ideas. Do not get stuck thinking I have to die with this failure. And I really want young entrepreneurs to embrace the failure, because that's where you learn. I mean, I think maybe for me, it helps to frame it as an experiment. I'm always like, do this experiment, figure out if this works, because that's how you learn from your experiments. And if a startup is a failure, that's okay. You're going to pivot. You'll come up with other ideas. And I think everybody that has, I'd say almost like 95% of all the startups very rarely get all the assumptions right. You're making pivots every day. And even my own company, when I was going through, I was like, as long as I'm batting more than 50%, I'm probably beating my competition. And I was like, because we are failing all the time on doing different things, but you learn, you adjust, you tweak. And I would say today's society, there's a real fear of failing, and I'm not going to have my good grades, or what happens if I drop out of school. That's another area that we're trying to address, is like, you're not dropping out of school. Maybe you're taking a sabbatical to go try your startup. And the nice thing about schools like Georgia Tech, let's say you try your startup, it doesn't work out. You realize it's not going to be the big success you wanted. That's okay. You can always go back to Georgia Tech. That was the thing that gave me confidence, was when I called admissions and I said, how long are my credits good for? They said 10 years. I was like, man, if I don't know whether I'll be a success in 10 years, I've got other problems. So, that gave me, I guess, 10-year runway to figure out whether my first company would be a success. And I think more students have to have, embrace the failure, but realize maybe it's not cut out for them.
Yeah, I think that's so beautifully put. I think that any time that I actually made a video on this somewhat this morning, that if you want different results, right? If you want to be someone who's special or accomplish something that most people don't, by definition, you're going to have to do things that most people don't. And that's going to be uncomfortable. And I'm saying this as someone who thus far in my life has taken the very, very safe path, right? Even though I'm on social media is not the most risky thing I've done, but it's not even that risky in the grand scheme of things, right? I do work a 9 to 5. I did finish my degree.
When are you doing a startup?
Working on it. Hopefully soon. But I think that, many people, it is the discomfort of not even necessarily failing, but the prospect of failing. Because I think that once it's a weird analogy to make, but I even will see it kind of like dating or approaching someone, right? There's a risk that you'll get rejected, right? But you'll realize that, and this would be analogous to failing a startup, you'll realize that life moves on. You're not going to die. And so I think that it's something that you can train your brain almost to push yourself into the discomfort and realize, okay, I'm still here. I still woke up the next morning. Now what?
That's right. Actually, and I just chatted recently at a table where head of Apple research, she was there, and she manages the AR, VR headset. And we were talking to some students, and we were on the topic of, is a startup a good thing? What happens if you fail and you have to go get a job at Apple? She goes, I love looking at resumes where they did do a startup, because it really shows that they're willing to take some risk, talk to customers, learn that. And so in her mind, spending the summer working on a startup was a huge plus and makes you stand out. So it's another, even if you want to go into more of your traditional large technology companies, I think doing a startup is a great stepping stone to getting there.
Yeah. Yeah. We've talked a lot about entrepreneurship. A topic that I talk about a lot on my platform, and I don't know how you're familiar with it, is the notion of the sort of the modern side hustle, and what I would actually consider to be somewhat of a bastardization of entrepreneurship, because whether it is, drop shipping or Amazon FBA or, even something like crypto trading that they think they, have a method. And so I think that I'm curious your thoughts on what people would say. I am an entrepreneur if I am working for myself and making money, and it's different from startups, but essentially, in my opinion, there's no problem they're solving there. They're they're trying to shim money from somewhere in the system, and they might do it successfully.
Sure.
But I'm wondering if you have any, I'm just going to throw that at you and see if you have anything to stick on. And if not, we can move on.
How do you want to frame, what's the question about it?
Do you think that there is a real, how would you define entrepreneurship, and would you consider someone who would say, oh, I'm drop shipping and I'm getting a market or a item to a customer, therefore I'm like you, and I'm an entrepreneur. Would you?
Yeah, I think by definition, entrepreneurs are people who start some kind of business, and if it's a side hustle kind of business, you're creating T-shirts or whatever you're building on the side, I think it's still entrepreneurship. I do think the potential can always be greater, because if it's, you're never going to have a major successful company if it's a side hustle. And so if you can think about possibly using it to shift into something bigger, I would definitely recommend that. In fact, I've seen there's at least one or two of the startups that I have funded. Their background, the founder's background, was drop ship, so they knew how to do the marketing. And a good example is Card. Do you know Card?
I'm good friends with Jeff, actually.
Yeah, so Jeff's the CEO, and his background is he was hanging out doing some drop shipping with some friends of his, and he was like, now that I'm doing this startup, he leveraged that into a full-time multi-million-dollar business. If you haven't gotten a Card, check it out. Once you Google it, you'll see it, and please buy a Card.
Yeah, no, I haven't spoken to Jeff in a minute. I'll have to hit him up. And you brought up something that reminded me, because we were talking about failure, and have you heard the burn the boats story? Essentially, it's a philosophical idea. I think it comes from some, I don't know, mythical story, essentially, that going into battle and burning the boats so you have no way home. And so essentially, like putting all your eggs in one basket,
Sure.
or putting yourself where failure is not an option. If you ever hear that one, failure is not an option. I'm wondering if you have any opinions on that, of essentially people thinking, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship, that they have to give themselves no backup plan. Otherwise, they won't succeed. If you have a plan B, you're planning for your plan A to fail, right? All of these things are things I hear online a lot.
Sure. It's a good question. I think from my perspective, it's probably one of the reasons why I am targeting students is they're burning the boat is that they have to sleep on a couch or some parent's house or wherever, their friend's house. It's not a big deal. I think what I do see, though, that people should think about is if they do have a job. I've seen where people are like, hey, I'm working at an Apple or Amazon, and I'm trying to get my startup going. Would you fund me? One of the things that we have a very frank conversation with is, for me to fund you of any sizable amount, that money is going to go, I'm betting on you, your team, your time, your focus, etc. And so an investor who wants to go back a startup, they want to see a founder who's willing to, if you want to call it burning the boat, or just becoming 100% focus and try to remove as many distractions that they can off their plate, so they can make sure that because at the end of the day, the startups that are most successful are the ones that are executing the fastest, the ones that are working on their problem, building the product faster than anybody else, that are solving the problem, getting more customers, getting more funding, scaling the business. You can't do that as a side hustle. And there's, hopefully you can buy a big boat like Bezos later on, but while you're still rowing a little boat, you need to be all in on your little boat.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's great advice as well. Just, it makes sense, right? That as someone who's investing in a company, you want to know that the thing you're investing in, they have your full attention and commitment to that thing. Otherwise, it's like, if you don't even believe in the thing, why should I believe in the thing?
100%. Yep.
We're getting close to the end here. I want to ask a little bit more about you, just so people can get a little bit more about you in terms of, you're clearly so passionate about entrepreneurship, which is something that I think we share, and maybe I haven't acted so much on that yet, but I have some years. But what are your passions? What are your hobbies? Just a little bit more about you beyond just the entrepreneur, philanthropist, angel investor.
Sure. It's a great question. Here's an interesting exercise. I'll ask you a question, kind of help pull it out. But I think if you had to define yourself, of who you are and everything about you into one word, what word would you choose to pick for who you are? A
single word?
Yeah.
And it's like a title. I would probably say...
Not a title, it's just a word.
Okay.
If you could think of like what's your whole being and what you're known for, or what you want to be known for, etc. Yeah. Can you sum yourself up in a word?
Yeah. I would probably say motivated, in the sense that I'm someone who genuinely enjoys whether it is improving myself in the gym or doing like my project of social media or at work, at my job, even in the classroom. I'm someone who actually does find a lot of intrinsic motivation in the actual work.
Yes.
And so that's why I think I'll never retire in the most traditional sense. And so that's what I'm someone who likes work for the sake of work, as long as I enjoy the work that I'm doing.
Hence you're motivated.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess for myself, somebody asked me that and I was like, that's a really great question. And I had to think about it, and creativity was my word. And I think it's something that as a kid, I was dabbling in doing art projects. I like being creative, especially on the computer. I would do a lot of video game kind of creation. That's actually what got me into coding, was to make a video game. And why? Because I thought it was fun and be cool to see the special effects, and you're shooting monsters and whatever else that you're doing in the game. And ultimately, I think that's been one of my core areas, that I like solving problems. Creativity is one of those areas where, give me a canvas and a problem, and I like drawing that stuff out. So I think beyond technology startups, there's areas that I think the world needs, in addition to solving whatever major technical problems, but also I would say I think there's opportunities to help the world through. There's two other areas that I'm very interested in. One is politics, maybe because I'm getting older, but I would love to see the new generation get into, not just beyond social media and outraged by what's happening in the world, but also like, how do you impact change? And I think one of the things that's missing is, I don't think a lot of kids or the general public it's almost like an entrepreneur. It's very rare to find entrepreneurs. It's very rare to figure out, how do you get in and make change at a political level? And that's one of the areas that I'm very interested in, because I think so many young kids have great ideas of, here's what our policy should be, and it's completely opposite of what it has been. And you've got this overwhelming, like, how do I even move? I'm yelling into the wind, type problem. And I think there's solutions out there where people could be more effective in grassroots activities and targeting the right politicians, or how do you become a citizen, a leader in the community? That's an area that I'm very interested in. And I'll say the third area that I'm very interested in is, I grew up Catholic. But I think as I studied science and all that, one of the areas I'm very interested in is, I'm working on a religion that's called open belief. And the idea there is, I want kind of an evidence-based religion that's based on not just faith because some book said something, but it's more, give me the data. Show me how this is backed up by some evidence. And so I really want to create kind of a community of people that are respectful, open to new beliefs, but also willing, but it needs to be ultimately backed by some evidence. And because we all have different ideas, and I think I've always been a fan of the golden rule: treat others how you want to be treated. And I think in most cases, I've been very fortunate to travel the world. Some with you, some with, just on my business and going to Latin America or Asia. Everybody wants to do good and wants to see good outcomes. And I think we need to be able to remove some of the labels that are keeping us apart. Because I think when you talk to people from on different sides of some of these conflicts that we're seeing in the world, you realize the actual people just want to have peace, solve real problems together, make the world better. And I think in many cases we could do better. And so I want to create something called open belief that is more evidence-based.
Chris, that's an awesome answer. And I want to conclude the conversations there, because I think you wrapped it up beautifully. My last question to you is, do you have any projects or anything that you would like to make broadly known, blasted to the world? If not, that's okay. But if you have particular things that you want people to go look out for, now would be the time to let them know.
Sure. I think based on what you said, who your audience is, definitely try if you want to try entrepreneurship. I'll provide a link with Carter to join Fusion. That's the platform I'm building. It's going to be a community around entrepreneurs and founders, but I'm also baking into that basically mentors, investors, and I also am going to bring in creators because I really think there's a ton of stories that are happening amongst all these founders that are building really cool companies that are solving major issues, and they don't know who the creators are. And I also talk to creators, and I'm like, you guys should be talking to these guys. So I'm going to try to blend creators and founders, and if you need money, let me know because we'll fund you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we'll put all those links in the description below. This is a relationship that I care so much about. So I'm happy to be able to share it with the people who I, talk to on a daily basis. And I look forward to future conversations. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Carr. Appreciate it.
All right.